Hey everyone, this is Matt with Learn Everything About Design, and in this video we're going to carry on with part 3 of this series where we are replicating the E36 trim piece. So if you haven't seen the first 2 videos, we created this using QuickSurface Personal, and the main idea here is to recreate the outside shape. So basically trying to see what you would see if this was installed on the car. It goes around the shifter. And then we also created the openings for these sort of switch panels, and then the centerpiece we did some basics around it. It wasn't a full reconstruction. The user that sent this to me is going to be 3D printing it. These pieces for E36s, as well as many old cars, just are not available, so you have to find one in good shape if you have a broken one, or if you're trying to customize it, make any changes, maybe swap in a different transmission, different shifter, whatever the case might be, then you have to essentially make your own. So because the goal is to recreate this, basically the part that you can see, and the rest of the features everything's going to be 3D printed. We're not going through all of the ribs and the mounting features or making holes or anything like that. Most of the questions I get around this type of workflow is, 1, how to get started, and 2, how do we create the geometry? Like, how do we physically make these complex shapes? Most people that reach out to me are okay with making prismatic shapes, creating a sketch, extruding, things like that. But for the most part, they get hung up with the big, broad, complex curves and shapes. So that's going to be the focus of our video. Now, for this one, if you want to follow along, there is a download link in the description of the video that has this mesh already inserted. Now, this mesh is a reduced mesh from the one that we used in QuickSurface, so it's been dropped to 20% of the original, like 2 million polygons. And that's because it really doesn't need to be that heavy of a mesh, and since we're working in Fusion, it's much better if we have it smaller. So if we take a look at the properties, we can see we're at 401 facets, so basically reducing that down from the original size. It's going to make it much more responsive. Now, if you want to, you can also right-click and make it unselectable. This will help because when we hover the cursor over, it's not trying to highlight all of the triangles. So if you've got hundreds of thousands or millions of triangles, that is really where the system gets hung up. So making it unselectable doesn't mean we can't interact with it, especially when we're working in forms, but it does mean we can't click on it on the screen. All right, so the way that we're going to approach this, we've done plenty of parts with things like mesh section sketches. We're not going to be using mesh section sketches, at least for this first part. We're going to focus on freeform modeling. Now, anytime I am starting with a complex part, whether I'm designing a part to fit, like a duct or a spoiler or wide body, I typically go to freeform, at least as a starting point, where you can snap to the mesh. It makes it so much easier, at least for me. You can do it with surfaces, and we've done, again, videos where we've used mesh section sketches. But for this part specifically, we did it with freeform modeling in QuickSurface. We're going to do the same thing here. So once we have a freeform body, we're going to start with the face tool and turn on Object Snap. We're going to do the same thing that we did in QuickSurface, where we're essentially looking at, in this case, we don't have visualization options like that heat map we use, but we do have the density of the triangles. So we're going to essentially go out to these corners, going to come down to where it starts to transition and come back over here. All right, so this is the starting point. We're going to say, okay, this is one big panel. And while it did snap to these corners, you can see the inside, it's basically just a big flat plane. So what we need to do is we need to divide this up. By default, it's not going to snap to the mesh. We have to use a tool called pull, and that's going to pull it to the mesh. We do have snap options when we're editing the form. You can turn on Object Snap. I have never liked the way that this works in Fusion when I'm working with meshes, so I never turn it on. You can experiment with it. It might work if you're trying to move points around just very, very slightly, but in general, I don't use it as a workflow. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to select Modify, Insert Edge, and select this edge. This is going to put a new edge right in the middle. We're going to say OK. Then I can use the Pull tool, and I can select these points. Now, the problem that we're going to have is the way that this is designed, or the way that it's divided up, it's going to snap to something underneath. And that's not really what we want. And QuickSurface will automatically snap to a part or a portion of it that is closest to our viewing angle. Fusion doesn't do that. So what we have to do first is we have to pull this up above, and then we can go to modify and pull, and it'll snap it down. Again, we want to make sure it's on the top. That looks pretty good. Another thing that we can do here is we can subdivide. Now, when we subdivide, we need to select a face. We can determine how many divisions we want. So at this point, let's say 3 this direction, 4 in the length. Probably a bit overkill, but what I'm looking at here is it's actually giving me these points that are going to be on a section of the mesh we have on both sides. I'm using a simple insertion mode, which means it's not going to keep the shape the same. If you set it to exact, what this will do is it will keep the shape exactly like it is, and it will adjust or manipulate it to fit. Simple insertion mode will just simply slap it right in the middle, and we're going to end up with a different shape. Next, I'm going to go back to the pull tool and pick the points that I want to come up to the mesh. Now, once again, this can be problematic depending on where those points are. If they're really far below that face, we might need to actually go back and manually move them. In this case, it looks to be okay, but we can pull up all of these points, make sure that they're all, even the corner points. And you can do a box selection, like you don't have to manually click on each one. I'm manually clicking on them just to kind of make sure that I know where all the points are. But we can see here now we've got all the points around, and it looks pretty good. And we can say, okay. Now, this doesn't mean that we've got a perfect replica of the shape. You can see it's actually a little bit low. It looks pretty good here, but you can see it's low here because these points ended up snapping to stuff that's below the mesh. And so what I need to do is I need to come in and manipulate this. Now, I'm going to give you a word of caution or a word of warning here. The more you manually manipulate these points, likely the further you're going to get away from an accurate representation. This face right now is pretty accurate. There's a high spot or a bump here, so it looks pretty low there, but I think overall it's okay. But you want to avoid manually manipulating individual vertices if you can help it. You can't always help it, but it's much better to do this when you've got a lower polygon model. And what I mean by that is if you've got fewer faces or fewer divisions, then it's going to have less of a local impact on the shape. Now, there are options where if you go into modify and turn on soft modification, and let's say I select this vertex, it's going to change the color of the other ones and it's going to gradually move them. And so this is a better option in terms of keeping a gradual transition of the shape. In general, the workflow, and I think I've done a video on this, but in general, the workflow is to start with the fewest number of faces possible, get the general gradual shape, and then add to it or manipulate it from there. All right, the next step for this, because unlike QuickSurface, what we're going to actually do is carry on with the freeform model. Part of the reason for this is because the freeform tools work different in Fusion than they do in QuickSurface. Now, that doesn't mean one is necessarily better than the other, but matching the curvature in these corners requires us to have a very dense set of edges. And that's something that's a bit trickier to do and really has a negative impact on the form inside of QuickSurface. So in QuickSurface, the better option is to do multiple surfaces, whether it's freeform, a loft, extrude, or whatever the case is, and work with it from there. Now, inside of Fusion, what we're going to do is we're going to select that edge. We're going to go to Modify, Edit Form, and we're going to start to extrude this by holding down Alt and then pulling this edge down. Now, before I get too far into this, as we start to transition this around the corner, keep in mind that you are likely going to want to change the orientation of the edge. And what I mean by that is you might likely rotate the edge. Because that's what happens in reality as you round these corners. The edges aren't just going to come and like slide down, they're going to rotate as they go. This means we're going to end up getting kind of far away from the shape, but we're going to fix that in a little bit. So I'm going to hold down Alt again, pull this out and rotate it like that, kind of pull it down. You also see it starting to get pretty far away. So before I get any further, I'm going to say okay, and I'm going to go to my pull tool. So I'm going to pull that as well as the second line of edges that I created. So I need to find them. Hopefully they're not too far below the surface, meaning they're going to actually rise up to the surface that we want them to. And you should also go back to the previous set of points, assuming they're still on the surface. They might not be, and pull those up as well. And the reason for this is because curvature in freeform models is not defined just by the edges that we create, but it's also the edges that are next to it control the curvature into and out of. And so that's important. So we need to go back. We're going to add another edge. I'm going to hold down Alt again, pull this one down. I'm going to use the vertical scaling to kind of get this to be mostly flat. Going to make sure it's outside of the mesh. We're going to say OK. While it's still selected, I'm going to go to pull. And then you can see that it pulled that down. We can also, once again, because we did add more edges, we can go back to the previous set and we can pull those out. You shouldn't have to go back more than one set of points. You can look and you can kind of see these are still on top. But if you feel like you need to, it will adjust them very slightly. So if you're trying to be as precise as possible, you can go back to those as well. We're going to say OK. And now we've got a pretty good representation. So in the bodies folder, if we hide the mesh, you can see curvature-wise, that looks pretty good. So if I turn on zebra stripes, and let's flip the direction here. If we turn on zebra stripes, you can see that, let's go ahead and turn up the repeats a little bit. And high quality. You can see that there maybe is a little bit of wiggle that happens in here. And what I mean by that is when we see this, where we've got like a narrow section and a wider section, it means that the curvature is changing in those areas. And we can kind of see it in this direction. It actually looks pretty okay in that direction. I'm going to hit cancel because I don't want to keep the zebra stripes. But again, essentially what we're trying to do is we're trying to get those edges to roll around. So I think that looks pretty good. On the other side, it's going to be a bit trickier because we've got this rounded section and then this flat section. So again, double click the edges, modify. This one is going to require us to do it, and we're going to need more edges to be accurate here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start by holding down Alt, pulling this one out just a little bit, let go and hit Alt again, pull it out again, rotate just slightly, I'm going to scale it a bit and pull this down. And before I go any further, not necessarily required. The more you do this, the fewer times you're going to need to stop. But as we're learning and as we're playing around with this, I find it's helpful to stop at different times through the process and just pull it back to the mesh. And the main reason for this is because this gives us a pretty good idea or understanding how close we are. Now, I will say that it pulled this one down into that little gap there. So I'm going to deselect that because I actually don't want it to pull that down so far. So I'm going to say OK. And then double click that edge again, go back to edit form. Edit form is also on the right click marking menu at this sort of, like 1, 2 o'clock position up here. So if you do like to use the marking menu, it is there. So I'm going to hold down Alt. I'm going to pull this one down. Because that fillet starts to transition into more of a flat face, what I'm going to do is start to scale this and then pull it down some more. And again, I'm going to hold down Alt. This one is going to be a very small change over here. So what I'm actually going to do is I'm going to set the pivot point right there. And I'm going to scale this down vertically until almost 0. I'm not worried about being too precise here. But then I'm going to go back in and again use the pull tool. Now, if you use the pull tool often, it's a good idea to put it to a shortcut key that you can use. That way you don't have to go back into that menu all the time. But for us, it's okay to go back into the menu. It also slows down the, builds a little bit of muscle memory and slows us down a little bit, so that helps. I'm going to go ahead and just grab a couple of these points. Again, you don't necessarily have to go back this far in terms of number of edges, but looks pretty good. All right. Now, we could carry this down a bit further. We could move the outside edges out a bit farther. I'm not too worried. Again, I'm not trying to do a perfect replica of this because I just want to make sure we understand the general workflow. If you are making a part like this, we can get 90% of the way relatively quickly. That last 10% is where all your time is spent. So if you're trying to massage a freeform model to be more accurate, or if you are, excuse me, or if you're trying to get all these little nuanced features, things like that, that's really where you spend most of your time. And so this is true whether you're modeling an entire car or just a part. Like you could spend, just kind of in a general sense, you could spend 2 hours to do the entire outside of a car body, and you could spend 200 hours doing all the details, the trim pieces, adding the details for a grille and for all these extra features. And I'm not even talking like manufacturable. I'm talking about, basic stuff. All right, so before I go too much further, another thing that I like to do is when I have a general freeform shape, because remember that these are direct modeling, what I generally do is copy and paste it. So Control C, Control V. So if I need to try to subdivide this more or extend it out or thicken it, I will do it on a copy. So that way I always have that original. Now, if you end up making changes to this, you can always add another copy, delete them, whatever you need to do. But that's a good option here. Another thing to note, which is kind of helpful, if you go into, let's say that I have this body here and I copy it and I'm in another design inside of a freeform model, you can actually paste it into a new design as well. Again, because these are just bodies with no history, even though it's a feature in the timeline, you can take those freeform bodies, copy them, and paste them into a new version, a new file completely. So that can be pretty helpful in some cases. Most cases, it's not super duper helpful, but in some cases it can be. All right, so I'm going to go to modify and thicken, and I'm going to thicken this inward. And you might be thinking, let's go ahead and do 3.7. You might be thinking, why would I thicken it here as a freeform model instead of thickening it as a solid body? Well, the big reason is when we thicken stuff like this, the corners are going to start to overlap. And when we do this as a surface in the design workspace, we don't really have good control over what's happening on the inside. Because I know this part is destined for 3D printing, I can actually select edges. So for example, this edge, let's go over to here, Control, double click that and hit delete. That will allow us to remove edges on the inside. And let's go ahead and move this edge, maybe move this edge down a little bit. And then let's go ahead and move this one. And so what this allows us to do is make the curvature work. So we can make adjustments here. Let's go ahead and pull these down. It's also good to go into box display. So that's Alt and 1 on the keyboard. This can really help when we're trying to sort out the curvature like this. Go ahead and pull these down and go back into smooth display. And so we can work with it so that we don't have these areas where it's pinching in those corners. And that's something we can do on the other side as well. So I'm going to come over to this side. I'm going to go back to my box display. Again, box display, this is a really good skill to learn, modeling in box display, because this can really help find some of these potential issues just based on the way that it looks in box display. So I'm going to go and pull that one out. And you pull this one up a little bit. And then in smooth display, we can see it looks pretty good. Now there are some issues like with this. Now in reality, this actually rolls under like a fillet on the real part. And so that's something we can also do here. Go ahead and pull this in. Again, go box display. Box display will really help highlight where the edges should be. Go back to smooth display, and it looks pretty good. Now this is a creased corner, so we could actually go in and apply a fillet there. Now, if you really wanted to, what we could do is select that and uncrease it and round it off. And so that way we could have a smooth transition of that shape. So if you've got the mesh model here, and again, I'm kind of inside where it is, but if you've got the mesh model here and it does round off in that orientation, then you can do that. In this case, I'm going to do Control Z and undo and leave it sharp, and I could put a small fillet on that corner when it converts. But that's why I would thicken as a freeform model, because the radius of curvature in those areas will oftentimes lead to issues when you thicken, because it'll bunch up in those corners. And I get a lot of questions like, how do we know this? How can we figure this out? Well, if you go to Inspect and Curvature Map Analysis, and you go to the Principal Maximum, so if I set this to 3.7 millimeters, at 3.7 millimeters, we can see red in these areas. And these are the areas where it bunched up when we thickened it, right? Below 3.7, if we went to, let's say, 2.2, that would, in most cases, be perfectly fine and not produce any issues. There's a little bit of red on that corner, not a big deal. But you can see here, really just right on the peak of that is where we might potentially have problems. And so this is the tool that I use to help find that stuff. And you can kind of figure out what thickness you can get away with. Now, in reality, again, you need to spend time making sure all these models are smooth. I didn't spend a ton of time making sure that the curvature was really nice in this area. So, so for example, when I look at this in box display, I can see all sorts of problems with these edges. So it kind of coming in, then back out. In reality, I would want them to be a little bit smoother of a transition. And when I look at it in smooth display, that looks a lot better. And so again, going back and forth and understanding how box display works and being able to make these changes and manipulations to your form, that's going to be the way that you get good quality geometry and good quality results out of these freeform models, is spending the time. And in reality, I would do this before I thickened it, but just for the purposes of this video, I'm not going to spend too much time trying to get it perfect. But this, again, this is that 90% or maybe even 80-20, where you can get pretty far quickly, but once you start to dive in and really try to hone in and highlight the good geometry, good curvature, and making sure these transitions are all good, the thickness is nice and consistent, that is really where you're going to spend all of your time making these kinds of models work. All right, so now I'm going to finish the form. So I've got a surface body for the top, that's because we copied it and pasted it. I've got a solid body that was the thicken. So now if I want to, let's say I kind of left that corner kind of messed up, but if I wanted to apply a fillet there, I could do that. If we needed to, well, maybe not that one. If we needed to round off that corner, maybe this corner as well. Within reason, obviously there will be a point where some of these things fail, but you can kind of see we can round those things off, and then that kind of helps smooth that out. Now, in terms of the rest of the model, this is again where we have to look at it and figure out how we want to approach the geometry. Whether it's an extrude like we did for QuickSurface, or if we want to make a freeform body snap to the inside of that, that takes quite a bit longer to do, but you could do that. You can sort of pick that. You can also eyeball it, depending on what's going in here, how the shift boot fits, and all that kind of geometry. You might get away with quite a lot just by eyeballing it and getting close. Now, that's not to say that in reality, in production manufacturing, that you would do that. No, that's certainly not the way you would approach it. But if you're trying to make a custom part for 3D printing, making it fit the outside shape is the most important thing. And then the rest of it is going to be, again, you're customizing. You're figuring out what you want to do. Now, the rest of the process is relatively the same as we did. I'm going to go ahead and make a mesh section sketch. Again, we can't select the body on the screen because we made it unselectable. You can select it here. The plane that we're going to use, I'm going to select the top plane. I'm going to pull this up just like we did in QuickSurface. Now, this could be a problem based on the orientation I have my part. You can kind of see it's tilted up based on that bottom plane. So this isn't going to work unless I rotate the plane, which I can do directly here. And then again, what I'm looking for is basically a good, clean sketch. So I'm going to say OK. It's going to create my mesh section sketch. We don't automatically go in by default and edit. We have to right click and edit the sketch. I'm going to hide the mesh. I don't have a good way to clean this up, but we do have the option to fit curves to mesh section. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start with a line. I'm going to snap a line from there to there. I don't really have a good reference down here because, again, it's kind of missing. But what we can do is fit an arc if we want to. So, for example, let's say arc. I'll go from maybe here to here. You can see it fits in the corner. And then now we've got that big arc. So basically fit to there, fit to there. Now, from here, what we're going to do is we're going to say OK. And what we've created is, let's double click that. What we created, double click that. So now what we've created is, essentially this. We don't have tangency, so if we need to add tangency between these, we want to add them. And then we can go back to fit curves. And again, what we'll do is we'll do an arc from here to here. We'll come back later and we'll connect those together. Arc to there, arc to there. We'll say OK. And then the rest is a straight line. I'm not going to snap it to the mesh, but you get the picture. And then again, you can come back and let's hide the mesh section. And let's make these two connected. And we'll make them tangent. Make sure that these are tangent. And so it's you can see it's not automatically applying the tangency, which means that we're likely going to have to make some adjustments. So if we bring the mesh section sketch back, you can see once we applied the tangency, it kind of changed things. The way that I would approach this in Fusion is I would find a point like this and fix it. And then from here, I would start to manipulate the arcs if possible, either manually dragging them or with dimensions. Now, it's a little tricky because of that tangency. So let's go ahead and unlock that. And maybe let's pull this. Let's go ahead and pull this back. Get it close. And this is an area, again, where I think the process is much easier in QuickSurface than it is in Fusion, because once these sketches start to kind of get messed up, it becomes really hard to do. So go ahead and pull that up and maybe give this a dimension. So let's say 500, see if it gets it closer. Let's try 600. All right, so 700 is a bit closer. This one's probably the same or similar. I know it's not perfect, but again, this is, that last 10, 20% is where you spend all your time. I think this is close enough for what we're doing. What I'm going to do from here is offset this. So we're going to come out, again, I'll just do 3.7 millimeters. And because Fusion does pretty good with selecting profiles, I don't need to make one construction or anything like that. But we will hide the mesh section, go back to our solid tools, and we want to show the mesh, and then we're going to extrude. All right, so we can go about this the same way. Let's do two directions. We can go about this the same way we did before, where we created a solid and we start to kind of hack it away. Or what we can do for side one is we can say to object and extrude it up to the object. We can make it longer than it needs to be on the bottom, and we can join them together. Because we still have this sketch and we're not worried about draft and things like that, we can use that as a cut. And if we hide the mesh, you can see now we've got that sort of inside piece. And the other stuff, again, it's kind of the same. You bring the mesh back. We create a standard sketch, so we don't need to do a mesh section sketch for this. You can use a 3-point rectangle. So for example, here to there to there. Do the same thing over here. Actually, let's go down here. I'm going to hold down Control to temporarily override constraints, and then E to extrude, and hold down Control, and we'll just pull those all the way up through. And there we go. And again, we can go through a similar process. I don't think that it's really worth the extra time, but trimming this away, adding the little tabs and so on. So again, these end up being fairly basic features in Fusion. So most of the time when people are asking questions, they're not asking questions about creating an extrude and a little rib or a tab. They're asking questions about creating the complex shape on the outside. So I think that's as far as I'm going to take this part. From here, we spent probably 30 to 45 minutes actually modeling it in QuickSurface. Obviously, it could be a little bit quicker without narrating. Fusion, we're 30 minutes in, roughly the same point, but we did a bit more with freeform in Fusion and less with surfaces. We actually didn't do any surfacing. So that has an impact on the overall time. Now, there are, of course, big nuance differences between the tools, right? And so a couple of things that I do want to mention is mesh section sketches in QuickSurface. Excuse me again. God, this time of year. Mesh section sketches in Fusion are there and available, but they are much easier to use and more robust in QuickSurface. And so when we're looking at trying to use sketches, specifically mesh section sketches, we're looking at trying to use the data from those. In Fusion, the data is more general than it is directly used. We can do straight lines, we can do arcs, snap to meshes, but once you get to actually using splines or curves or things like that, definitely don't use that in Fusion. It's not going to produce a good result. The quality of the spline is going to be awful. So definitely don't use it. Straight lines and arcs are fine as long as you can get it close to the mesh. In the most cases, I use the mesh sections more generally in Fusion, where I use them more precisely in QuickSurface. For freeform modeling, in Fusion, it is more of a manual process. You don't have an analysis tool to tell you how close you are. You don't really have the same level of moving things around and snapping them to the mesh. So those on-the-fly manipulations are much easier and more robust in QuickSurface than they are in Fusion. I think Fusion is a better freeform modeler. So if you're trying to create a design that happens to snap to the mesh, but mostly the design is new, then Fusion has, in my case, it has benefits over QuickSurface for those types of modeling applications. And QuickSurface is not claimed to be a standalone CAD program. It's not that intention. But again, this is kind of where I see the differences. And I get asked these questions all the time. For me, QuickSurface is really good at the extrapolating the data from the meshes, where Fusion is good at generalizing the data on the meshes, but creating new geometry that fits to it. And that's kind of where I see the differences between those. Now, hopefully these two videos helped understand that process between QuickSurface, in this case, Personal, but the process would be the same if you're using LITE or Pro, if you're using the same manual tools. So the manual approach that we did in QuickSurface Personal would work in all three versions. If you are trying to use some of those Sketch Assist tools or auto freeform tools, things like that, those tools are not available in Personal. They are available in LITE and Pro. In different versions of those tools are available. But the manual approach, again, is going to be the same no matter which version you're using. So with all that said, if you have any questions on anything you saw in those three videos so far, let me know. If you want to see me do this part, at least what we've done here in Plasticity, let me know that as well. I will probably do that. I'll try to get to it soon, but if people want to see it, then I will try to do that as well. Now, we did a video in the past where we compared QuickSurface Lite and Fusion and Plasticity for mesh-based stuff. I know Plasticity is always looking to improve the mesh-based modeling, so I think some tools will be coming out in the future for that. But as of right now, I would say that it's kind of It would be a different approach because it doesn't have freeform tools. Um, we can build faces on a mesh, and we can do 3D curves on the mesh, but we would likely be using surfacing tools. So that's something to keep in mind. We will cover all that in another video. Again, leave a comment if you want to see that. And if you like this type of content, you want to see more, always let me know what you want to see. I make a massive list. I've got a lot to get through. And if you do like this content, you can subscribe and be notified when we do upload it. All right, so I think it's going to do it for this video. Once again, leave a comment if you have any questions. And as always, thanks for watching. We'll see you in the next one.